I'm I'm so excited to meet you finally. A lot of the viewers who are participating in this dialogue through in at various parts of the world are really honored. We're grateful. We're blessed to have this dialogue with you. Azar Nafisi, I mean, a lot of us have read Reading Lolita in Tehran. I mean, I've read it several times, and also created my own Lolita circles, clandestine circles with young readers to discuss and open up taboo subjects. So it's inspired reading circles, I'm sure, all over the world, and especially in places where they're so much needed. The Republic of Imagination, I picked up, I think, sometime in 2016, and I've just read it again. So your books, I mean, these are two of several of your books. Read Dangerously has just come out, and I can see the themes just reappearing through the books, all calling for the importance of reading good literature to portal us to different world, to reimagine. And for Sahar, we are as a network of women human rights defenders and lawyers from all over the world. Justice needs to be reimagined. We need to think of equality in various ways, and it's through books that we can start we can start expanding our minds to those possibilities. So thank you so much for being a
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. It's great to be here with you and have this conversation.
Thank you. Azar, I would like to start with, I mean, of course, we can't discuss your works outside of the current political context of Iran, Afghanistan, but also many crises that are spiraling out of control in many parts of the world. Some of the people tuning in come from conflict-ridden contexts, and are inspired by the movements in Iran. But I wanted to take in one of, well, your book, Read Dangerously, you write these letters to your Baba John, which are so endearing, so heart touching, and you say that you don't have to go back to those days because those days are always a part of you. I wanted to ask, what were your motivations writing the books that you have already written?
Well, writing a book is like falling in love. You know that you're deeply involved, but you don't know why. Usually with me, an idea comes to my mind, or there's an experience I've had that doesn't go away, and I keep living with it and waking up thinking of it. And I reach a point where I think I need to investigate this. I believe with Margaret Atwood that writing is an act of investigation. You don't know everything when you start writing. There are feelings and emotions and ideas that are out there, but in the process of writing it, you discover yourself and you discover those ideas more deeply. So it is like falling in love. When you fall in love, you come home and you don't know why you feel this way. What is it? But you want to know the person you love. You want to find out about them, and that is how I write my books. With reading Lolita in Tehran, when I came here, I felt so guilty because I was here in safety, and the millions of Iranians were still under the yoke of the Islamic regime. And so I wanted to talk about it. I wanted to give voice to those voices of ours that had been silenced. So that was one motivation for writing that book. The other was I got so angry about the way in the West they thought about us.
Hmm.
You would talk to people and they would say, but it's their culture. And by that, they meant marriage at the age of 9, or mandatory hijab or polygamy. They would call all this our culture, not our philosophers, poets, writers, not the great traditions that these Muslim majority countries have gone through. They go back to thousands of years ago, you know. And so I wanted to let people over here understand about this rich culture of Iran, and to let them know that in Iran there are young people who know more about Western culture than those living in the West. I wanted they not only know about their own culture and past, but about the world. And so that was how the idea for reading Lolita took shape, for example.
In your most recent book called Read Dangerously, I was curious as to why you use the word dangerously.
Well, you know, if we read well, especially when you're reading great books, you're risking something, because writing, in essence, is about revealing the truth. And
Mhm.
once you know the truth, you can't remain silent. You become complicit if you're silent. So the reader takes the risk that after she reads a book, she might have to do something about it. So that is one reason that reading becomes dangerous. But the other thing about reading is that sometimes you have to change through reading. It is not just about the world outside.
Mhm.
Like when I was writing, I was finding out a lot of things that were wrong with me that I had to change. And when I read a great book, sometimes I find myself in it, and I don't like what I see, you know. So it is dangerous because you might have to change. You might have to present yourself to the world not the way you have been doing it up to now. And that is why I feel reading is dangerous. And reading is dangerous by the way totalitarian mindsets, even in democracies, censor and ban books. I mean, here in America, even, we're having banned books, you know. So, what is it about books that is so dangerous that the most powerful people on earth feel that they have to censor and then jail authors, kill them? There must be something dangerous in them if they are reacting in this way.
In your last book, Read Dangerously, you mentioned this person you met in a bookshop, and you gave him the name of Raman, who you say just captured this the desire, the such a feeling to read in Iran, that people are xeroxing copies of books. And in fact, I was also talking to one of my co-founder, and she said it's incredible how a text comes out in English and the next moment you have a copy of it in Persian, because somebody has translated and reproduced and perhaps even contravened the copyright laws in order to get the word out. And such is the desire. But you contrast that in your book with complacency in perhaps more peaceful states, where reading isn't dangerous or politically attacked in these obvious brutal forms. And you quote Ray Bradbury's book Fahrenheit 451. I wanted I wanted to ask you, what are the signs of our complacency that we need to be aware of?
Well, you mentioned about countries, democracies where they don't, where they can read whatever they want, uh, but you see them becoming complacent. The crisis we are in right now, for example, in America, is because we do not understand that these rights we have now were not God given.
Mhm.
People have died for them. People have been fighting for them. And one of the things I mentioned at the end of reading Lolita in Tehran, but I talk about it in Read Dangerously and Republic of Imagination and others, is how freedom itself is an ordeal. It is not something that you have and you can just live with it forever. You have to nurture freedom every day. You have to be on guard. Otherwise, it will wither and die, you know. So I felt that living in a country like Iran or living in Afghanistan or in countries where people die because they read, you know, these countries are good reminders to democracies that democracy cannot survive if we do not think and feel and imagine democratically.
Mhm.
And if we want to feel and imagine and think democratically, then we need to read and to nurture arts and music and everything that is about our heart and soul as human beings. And you know better than I, when you're deprived of something, then you know the value of it. And as you mentioned, what you said was so touching, the fact that a book comes out in English somewhere, and the next thing you know, there they are in Iran reading it and talking about it. You know, that is the power of of imagination and ideas. It defeats boundaries. It is the only place where we are all equal in that republic of imagination.
Azarjan, in one of the things that I learned out of this last book, Read Dangerously, is you make a distinction between literature as tools of resistance and reading as an inherent act of resistance. Can
Yeah.
you help explain that distinction?
Well, because you know what I was talking about, how literature reveals the truth, and so the act of reading takes you out of yourself. The act of reading, like the act of writing, is dependent upon two human traits. One is curiosity.
Mhm.
Um, as a reader, you want to know what happens to the characters. Where do they go? How do they go? And the second thing about reading is that it is very democratic. If you're a good reader, you don't go into a book with your own presuppositions. You don't impose your prejudices upon the book and say the book should be like this, the way I want it to be. You go into the book risking the fact that you will see things in the book that you don't like, that you're going to um, uh, um, have to be challenged.
Mhm.
And that is what good readers are. They allow themselves to be challenged, and curiosity takes you into the mind of other people. And that is the second thing that great reading and writing depends on, and it's empathy. I mean, we can't connect with everyone in the world physically, but we can connect with everyone in the world through reading. It- Reading takes us to places we have never been. Most of the places I have been to, I had been there through books before. Um, I think of, I don't know, France and England and Turkey and, you know, all of these places I have been to because I have been reading them. And so reading becomes a source of knowledge. And it becomes a source of knowledge through curiosity and empathy. You know, Nabokov used to say, curiosity is insubordination in its purest form. And curiosity is insubordination. And that is the great thing about both literature and science. Because science, you can't just accept your own formulas forever. You have to accept change. And science is an investigation of nature. So you have to be curious, and you have to be able to accept that you are wrong, that what your theories did not work or do not work.
That, I think also for me, it's why I go back to your books. I mean, there are thousands of great literature. When one spends additional time on on a single book or series of books, it's because it's giving me something.
Mm.
I think for a lot of us in the activist world, especially lawyers, I picked up on a sentence in your book where you said that politicians use very formulaic terms, and in fact, law, it's an act of, you rebuke one, you prescribe what is a wrong, what is a right. It's written in quite black and white terms. There's very few areas of gray, and 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 that become I feel that can become a place for perspectives to then even polarize itself even further. Whereas books, they're not prescriptive.
No, no.
They're not, yeah. Well, great literature is not prescriptive. It just reveals people's experiences, and then you, through empathy, you can understand why an act is wrong without being told it's wrong, right?
Exactly.
Mm,
Exactly what you said very well describes it, that literature is not prescriptive. That, for example, about a subject like democracy,
mhm,
it doesn't talk about democracy. I mean, you read a novel, it doesn't say we should all be democratic. But what it does through its shape, through its form, it is democratic. It teaches us to be democratic because if you're a great writer, you give voice to every character, even the villain. You have to give voice to them.
mm,
You have to be democratic enough. A bad writer is like a dictator. He imposes his voice upon all the characters. So the characters, rather than becoming alive and letting us experience them, and through experiencing them make our own judgment, it makes them puppets. The characters become messages, and the reading becomes boring, because what is there to learn? What is there to know if the writer is telling you how you should write? Whenever I read a bad book, I'm reminded of Ayatollah Khamenei, or Stalin, or, people who impose their own will upon
mhm.
everyone else. Yeah, act of reading becomes liberating. Uh, you know.
Azerbaijan, after Taliban took over Afghanistan in August of 2021, and then the capital where we used to work were flooded with Taliban fighters. And I was just discussing with some of my friends and colleagues, who are they? Where are they from? And, through stories, I started to understand that these are boys, ripped from their families at a young age.
Mm.
They the guns are for them a reclaiming of identity and authority. When they went into Kabul, I mean, there were these videos of them playing in the gym and swinging in the amusement parks, and people were laughing and making fun of them, but it was really demonstrative of something incredibly sad. that they've never, and in fact, they were purchasing a lot of soap and shampoo. They've never, can you imagine the smell of lavender or aloe vera in a soap? It's eye opening. And then, but I'm an activist, so I'm programmed to do advocacy. We have to campaign against this and that, and fight for justice and fight for accountability, and that too is important. But when I was reading your book, you dedicate a lot of time to knowing your enemy and empathizing with your enemy. And in this time of crises, in the height of emotions, um, how does one sorry if I'm asking a very tough question, how does one do that?
Well, I exactly empathize with you. A lot of times I cannot abide by what I preach. I mean, I had the same problem in Iran, where sometimes I was so filled with anger and with frustration and helplessness that I would say, just let them die.
Mm,
Let them, and over here a lot of times, even in dealing with the totalitarian mindsets in a democracy like America, I feel the same way. When I listen to the former president of this country, the way he lies, and so it is very difficult. But that is what differentiates between us and our enemies. We cannot become like them, because our point is not just, like, for example, in Iran, our point is not just throwing one regime out and bringing another one in. Our mission should be to democratize the society through the means we use. So you cannot reach nonviolence through violence.
that's very good. Yeah.
And one of my favorite writers that I mentioned in Read Dangerously and also in Republic of Imagination, James Baldwin, he talks about the dangers of hate. That once you hate, he says that he's worried about the hate without and the hate within. Both of them are dangerous. And those young men you describe, uh, I think that all their lives, most probably, first of all, they haven't seen the world, and then they have been humiliated. Uh,
Mm,
the resentment against the West, it comes out of the fact that they are fascinated with the West. They want to become like them, and
mm,
but they can't, so they kill them because they can
mm,
become like them. And what I tell myself under these circumstances, that even if you want to defeat the enemy, you have to not become like him. Um, and one of the examples that come to my mind is at the end of World War II, with the Nazis, the way the Allies dealt with the Nazis. They did not say that we'll do with you like what you did with us. We put you against the wall and shoot you. They said, we will go through a trial. We'll put you on trial. We give you a chance to say what you have to say. And then they punish them. I mean, you can't not punish someone, but not just through sheer violence. That's not how you do it. And would would somewhere, if you want to win, you have to go into the mind of your enemy. A good general, I think, is the one who knows the enemy. And uh, our weapon is our minds, our feelings, our emotions. Uh, this is what they don't offer, and a democracy offers. And also, the democracy, it's difficult to be democratic. It's sometimes easier to go with a totalitarian system. It tells you everything. It tells you how to walk, how to talk, so you abdicate responsibility. You're not responsible, someone else is, And so many people genuinely like that. They go after it. That's why it's so dangerous. It's so seductive. While if you are democratic, you constantly challenge yourself. You constantly are open to change, and democracy is difficult. It needs to be um, uh, the challenges that it offers needs to be met.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And Azar John, I guess what I'm getting out of this is maybe we need not see it as either we hold them just and accountable or we empathize with them, but that it can happen or it has to happen in parallel with each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has to happen in parallel with each other. Yeah, it's tough. I think about societies that have to reconcile. I mean, in some of these places, these whether you call them soldiers, fascists, ideologues, they are a part of our society,
Yeah.
and we have to live with them. We have to live alongside them. So the question is, how do we deal with them? Um, and as you say, like reading makes you think about their experiences, and maybe that could be the bridge towards
Yeah.
reconciliation in the future, no?
Well, you, Natasha Jan, have been working with justice, so you know that um, would real justice means to apply the truth to the circumstances. Like, for example, take what is happening in Iran right now. Um, they kill us, but people, what they don't say, let us kill Khamenei. They say, down with Khamenei. We
Yeah.
want him to go. They and the activists are working through democratic institutions in order to gain justice. It is not just haphazardly saying that these guys are bad, so why doesn't America come and invade Iran?
Mm.
Or that they're using violence against us, we'll go and bomb their houses. Um, some incidents happen because of the high level of emotions and anger. But as a whole, the direction of this movement, and I've noticed this about women's movement everywhere, like in Afghanistan, for example, they rely on tenderness. They rely on shunning violence, and that is why I'm hopeful about a movement like the one that is happening in Iran, because it is based on something so radically opposed to what the Islamic Republic is offering, and so
Mm-hmm.
justice needs that kind of a space in order to be effective.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Azarjan, I had another question regarding James Baldwin, and actually, when you were describing him, you were also comparing him to the not comparing his works to the works of Harriet Beecher Stowe, who you says writes writes novels of emancipation and self-determination of the Black people, but eventually what she ends up doing is inscribing white attributes to these black characters in order to humanize them, whereas Baldwin doesn't do that. Can you explain? It really struck me. I made a note of it because I think we often fall into the traps of equating modernity with whiteness, or progress, or even democracy with whiteness. And I think in a way that prevents certain societies who cannot identify with that. It deters them from finding their own idea of justice and progress in their own terms. So that comparison triggered this idea in me, but I wanted to hear more from you why Baldwin's works were important.
Well, Baldwin's work, I mean, Baldwin is really amazing, and I think that he is very much needed today. Of course, Harriet Beecher Stowe's novel is important because at that time we have to take the circumstances into consideration. It gives voice. She's a white woman trying to find the voice of a black man.
Mm-hmm.
So that is very important in itself. But Baldwin, um, while he writes and writes deeply and with a great deal of anguish about his race, like the novel Go and Tell It on the Mountain, or most of his novels are like that. He does not want to be known only as a black writer. Uh,
Mm.
he wants to be known as a writer. He feels that, uh, and there is one article he writes about Shakespeare and why he hated Shakespeare at the beginning, and now why he loves him. And so he's not afraid to take from others. He's not afraid of white men and women. He doesn't think that they can assimilate him. If he likes Henry James, it doesn't mean that he's a slave to the West, to the white man. If he loves George Bernard Shaw or Dickens, or all of these writers that he talks about writing, he said that his first novel, which became very popular. And they all said that here's a new black writer coming into the world. And the next novel he writes, what does he do? He writes about a white male um, gay man, you know and his publisher refuses to publish it, says that you're a black writer. You can't write about, this white male. And his agent says, burn the book, don't publish it, burn it. And he says, I told them, screw you, and went and published in England. The whole point is that he is not afraid of the other.
Mm.
By writing about a white man, he is not becoming subservient to the white man, but he is becoming more powerful because he has control over what a white male does. So all these theories about each person should only write about oneself, read about oneself, think about oneself, apart from the fact that it's so boring to constantly be thinking about yourself only. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
the whole, what Baldwin represents is an aspect of fiction that is very important, and that fiction is always about the other. It is not about you only. It is, even when it is about you, it's about the other in you. So um, we don't there is a trend, for example, in United States, where they say you only stick to your own, but you don't, because you don't want, I mean, we're fighting segregation because of the fact that it becomes exclusive. These whites, the reactionary whites, they don't mind us not writing about them. They don't want us to write about them. So to challenge them, you have to write about the other. And once you write about the other, you discover not all white people are bad, and not all white people are good. And that we, as part of humanity, share
Mm,
certain things in common. Yeah.
mm, mm.
Um,
Also, if can I ask you to develop this point further in reference to um, Margaret Atwood's books, where
mm,
she talks about there are anecdotes of the commander as well as Aunt Lydia,
yeah,
where when you read, you can't put them in a category bad or good, but it's more fluid, and they're moving between these categories that now you cannot say the protagonist and the villain anymore, because those terms are not determinative any longer. Um, that was also a point that really stood out to me.
that is such a good point you brought, Natasha, and uh, exactly. Most dystopian novels, who the villain is. I mean, the bad guys.
Mm.
It is more black and white sometimes when you read a dystopian novel. But Margaret Atwood is among those writers who um, always brings the doubt into the certainty, you know. And the protagonist of her novel talks about the commander who's the enemy, and says that in another life I might have even liked him, you know. It reminds me of uh, Elliot Ackerman talking about the former enemy of his when he had a talk with him. And he said that he discovers how much they have in common. Their families, their attitude toward war, you know.
Mm.
So this is why I say that reading is dangerous, because it makes you doubt. I mean, Atwood makes you doubt. Do you feel sorry for the commander at the end when his career and his life might be over after what they discover about him, you know? And what about Aunt Lydia? Is she a savior or is she a villain? Especially Aunt Lydia is
Mhm.
so amazingly drawn.
And that reminds me, often when people ask us or in my team about our work, they are curious about the interactions between who they consider the protagonists and the villains in our lives. Like, what are your experiences with Taliban or a male conservative judge in the court? Because it's that interaction, that face-to-face interaction, when one starts to humanize the other, because we are also the manufactured enemy in their
Yeah,
mind, the Western agents, the spreaders of immorality and infidelity. I mean, you know the terms well enough. And so when there's a meeting, the space between these two individuals who have manufactured each other as enemies, it becomes a curious space of trying to understand one another. Like you said, that the young Talib is curious about his invaders, the US military, and vice versa. So um, I think in the literature, this is what it's revealed to us, that there is no really protagonist and villain in our lives. um, and and when we come together and when we face each other as we do, it becomes an opportunity to unravel the manufactured labels. No.
yes, exactly. You put it so well. I don't know what I can add to what you said, but I agree with you, and that is why I had that chapter on war, and uh, each person. I mean, each writer I talk about in that chapter, has gone through some sort of a war. I mean, Elias Khoury with the Middle East wars, with Palestine, and Israel, David Grossman, and Elliot Ackerman, all of them. And all of them um, uh, at some point empathize with their enemy without saying that, okay, if all is done, it's okay, we don't need justice. We still need justice. It is, some people think that it is between wanting justice and not wanting it. No, we want justice. It's about what kind of justice we're
Mm,
going to provide these people. Are we going to kill them? Are we going to just silence them? Or are we going to put war crimes on trial and uh,
mhm,
and educate people about them? I worry about our universities. Will they not read Hitler's Mein Kampf? Because this new generation, like every other generation,
mhm,
needs to know about these atrocities. And the
mhm,
place where they read about them is in universities and schools. And if we just censor reality, um, uh, tomorrow our children wouldn't know how to act in a world that is fraught with crisis. So I think that that is very important in what kind of activism we become involved in.
Azarjan, I know you have to leave, though I would keep you for hours to talk about each of your books. But I will let you leave if you promise to do a conversation with us sometime in the future once again.
It was lovely. It was just absolutely lovely talking to you. And you're doing what they said. You're doing God's work, And I'm so grateful that we connected. And please remain connected, and we'll have future conversations, I hope. No, but really, please do remain connected.
I certainly will, and thank you for extending the generosity of your words, your time. Even I understand because of the situation in Iran, it must be weighing very heavily,
Yeah.
but that you took your time to speak to us across the world and the time zones.
Yeah.
It's very
Please
hopeful.
don't sleep. I can't believe it.
This was worth it.
If you ever come to Washington, D.C., let me know.
Okay, certainly. Azarjan, again, thank you so much for this conversation. I know you're going to an exhibition. I wish you all the best for
Thank
that.
you.
Enjoy it, and
Thank
we will
you.
be in touch, inshallah.
Thank you.
Khuda Hafiz.
Khuda Hafiz. Khuda Hafiz.